from Washington. This is Evening Edition. Now, here is Martin Agronsky.
Good evening. Senator George McGovern of South Dakota was the Democratic presidential candidate in 1972. Richard Milhouse Nixon defeated Mr. McGovern by a very large majority. Now the senator indicates he might get on the presidential merry-go-round again. Senator McGovern says he may enter some primaries in late spring if the other candidates do not address the whole range of issues the way I feel they should. Well, tonight on Evening Edition, a discussion of the 1976 presidential prospects and Senator McGovern's possible role with Democratic Senator George McGovern of South Dakota and Stan Cloud of Time magazine. Well, Senator, let's take your own words. I may enter some primaries and in effect become a candidate if the other candidates do not address the whole range of issues the way I feel they should. Are they?
Well, let me put that matter in perspective,
Right.
Martin. I was asked a hypothetical question some time ago to the effect that if none of the other candidates really stood up on the issues, could I see myself getting into the race? I said, well, under those circumstances, it might be a possibility. But then I added, and I would like to emphasize this today, that I don't intend to be a candidate in 1976. I can't conceive of a circumstance where no other candidate is going to stand up on the issue. I think most of them will. I think there are a broad range of issues on which we evaluate candidates. And I fully expect to see the Democrats nominate a candidate who will be acceptable to me. I may not agree with him on every issue, but there are a number of people in the race, a half a dozen that I can think of, who are already in that are acceptable to me as presidential candidates. I think one of them will win the nomination, and I expect to be out campaigning for him. I don't expect to be a candidate in 1976.
Well, that's stated very clearly. Of course, one of the candidates who is a leading prospect for the nomination is a gentleman you say you would find it difficult to support, Senator Jackson. You've said the same thing of Governor Wallace, which is more understandable. Why Senator Jackson?
Well, I might find it difficult to support Senator Jackson in view of our differences on the matter of defense, on how much of the budget ought to be allocated to defense. We had a long-standing difference on the war in Vietnam. We perceive the country differently. But if the opposition is Mr. Reagan or Mr. Ford, and the Democrats were to nominate Jackson, I suspect I would do what Senator Jackson did in 1972 when he reluctantly supported me. Senator Jackson is no secret, is not my choice for the Democratic nomination. I think we ought to nominate someone who has a different view on national priorities. I think we ought to nominate someone who is for détente, who believes that we have to learn to live at peace with the Soviet Union, who believes that we ought to scale back on military expenditures at a time when we're already allocating well over $100 billion for that purpose. But I think the Democrats are going to nominate a candidate in 1976 that I'll be proud to support, and I expect to do my part to help him get elected.
Would you like to give us his name?
Well, I don't have any choice at the present time. As I've said, there are half a dozen of these people who are already in the race that are acceptable to me.
Senator, in Louisville a few weeks ago at the Democratic Issues Convention, you delivered a speech which was, among other things, a ringing endorsement of busing and of the goal of integration, more importantly, as I read the speech.
Well, that's important to draw the distinction. I'm not either here tonight or in Louisville making a ringing endorsement of busing as such. It just happens that the courts have said that that is one way to achieve integration, and when other methods are not used, and the courts say that in order to achieve integration, to break down the walls of segregation, that busing should be used, I believe in standing by the law and standing by the courts. In that sense, I would stand by busing as one means to achieve integration, to break down the walls of segregation. If it can be done in other ways, I'm willing to look at those other ways.
But there was probably, with the exception of George Wallace, that's probably a statement that almost any Democratic candidate could, even including Senator Jackson, could endorse today. What's not clear to me is why you seem to suggest so strongly in that speech that the other Democrats, and especially the other Democratic candidates, were dodging the issue.
No, I didn't say that. I said that the Democratic Party can't avoid that issue when it's raised, and that it's a great mistake for any Democrat to pretend that we can run away from the issue when we're asked about it. And we will be asked about it.
But do you think the party is running away from it at this point?
I think a number of people, in view of the response to my speech, think that it's possible to avoid any reference to that issue. But how can you do that when you have 5,000 people outside a convention hall saying we're opposed to buses, we want the buses stopped? And inside the convention hall, you have certain Democrats implying that they're willing to do that. They're willing to leave the impression that we can stop the buses, vote for us, and we'll stop busing. We're not going to do that unless we violate the Constitution of the United States. And I felt that needed to be said, and that it needed to be said in Louisville. I thought it was a mistake for anyone to assume that a Democratic Issues Conference can be held in a city where busing is on the lips of every voter, where it is the issue in the streets, where it was the concern of the people of that city, and to go there and assume that we could arrive in Louisville and leave without confronting that issue. But I don't insist that the Democrats have a plank on busing. I don't insist that candidates go around trying to demonstrate they're more for busing than anyone else. What I object to is the way the issue was used in 1972 by an incumbent president who left the implication that he was not only against busing but was going to do something about it. He didn't. There was more busing. I don't like the stance of the present occupant of the White House who's saying I'm against busing, leaving the impression that it's a presidential prerogative. And I felt the best way to get that issue out of the campaign was for us as Democrats to say, look, we're going to stand by the courts. We're against segregation. If it's going to take busing to end it, so be it. We'll stand by the Constitution. We'll stand by the courts. That's the only point I wanted to make.
Senator, the Louisville Courier-Journal, curiously, agrees with you. There was an editorial in the Courier-Journal which said that your speech was useful especially because, as they put it, our own local and state politicians have largely quit talking about the issue of segregation. And the Times added, by casting the issue where it needs to be cast as a moral issue involving the right of all Americans to equal opportunity, Senator McGovern has chosen conscience over expediency. Is that what you had in mind?
Well, that was one point that I wanted to make, Mr. Agronsky. Not only the Louisville Courier-Journal, but the Louisville Times and the Boston Globe, incidentally, which is located in another city where busing has been very much an issue, editorialized in support of what I was trying to do. I think they understood that I wasn't there because I'm overjoyed about the fact that we have a number of students riding buses in order to achieve integration. But what they were applauding is that I refused to demagogue on the issue. I said the courts have spoken. In those school districts where there has not been an effort to achieve integration and where busing has been ordered, I think as a party we have to stand behind the courts. We don't have the luxury of saying this is a presidential prerogative either to be for or against busing when it's ordered by the courts. Once those courts have spoken, we need to carry out the law.
Fair enough, Senator, but you know, let's take the strength of the position that you did take there, and let's examine something which seems to be a paradox here. You observed at Louisville that any candidate, an anti-busing candidate, as you put it, would prove as president to be either a liar or a violator of the Constitution. And you said that as far as you were concerned, a candidate who ran on the busing issue should be committed, and you had no intention of doing that. Well, here one seems to see, or I'd like you to explain what is apparently here, a very fundamental inconsistency. You, in effect, seem to be saying that the Democratic candidate must accept this as an issue, at the same time as you're saying that a candidate who doesn't accept it as an issue should be committed.
Not at all.
No.
I'm not insisting that a candidate even discuss busing at all. I don't think it ought to be necessary for the Democrats even to write a plank in our platform saying we're for busing. What is important is for us to make clear that we stand behind due process of law, that we're against segregation, that we are for equal opportunity for our children and for all other American citizens, and if it takes busing to achieve that, we will support that. We will stand by the courts. I'm not insisting that a candidate, in order to get my support, has to go out and make busing the big issue. What I am saying is that if a candidate demagogues against busing, if he goes out and says, elect me, and the school buses will stop, I will not support that candidate because he's deliberately misleading the American people.
But Senator, the trouble I have with that position, or at least with the speeches you delivered, is that with one exception, I'm not aware of any Democratic candidate who is doing that. And therefore, I'm confused about what your motive was in delivering that speech at that time.
Well, I want to put down not only that one candidate, but any others that are tempted to take that course.
Do you think others are?
I think there's a temptation in that direction, and I felt that my voice ought to be raised in Louisville because that's the scene of the issue. It isn't the only place where it's an issue, but it's a place where our party needs to stand up on that question. Now, I think the Democratic candidate for governor in Kentucky did not make busing an issue, but he did stand by the law. The mayor stood by the law. The Republican candidate in Kentucky tried to give the impression that if he were elected, school busing would stop in Louisville. Now, he doesn't have that power. The only way he can do that is to violate the courts and to violate the Constitution of the United States. Let me put it this way. Those of us who are saying that when the courts have ordered busing that we ought to obey the law, we're not the divisive political leaders. We're not the ones that are raising the issue of busing. It's those people, and I regret to say that the last two presidents of the United States, Mr. Nixon and Mr. Ford, are in this category. Those people who say, we don't like busing, support us and the buses will stop, those are the people that are making an issue of it.
Right.
They're the ones that are dividing the country on this question.
We'll leave aside Mr. Wallace, who's a special category. Although none of the other candidates, to my knowledge, are campaigning on or against the busing issue, some, if asked, will say that they oppose it. Senator Benson says he opposes it. Senator Jackson says he opposes it. Several others, Congressman Udall and Senator Bayh, say, well, they aren't enthusiastic about it. If present, they would carry it out, but they'd like to find some better way. Mm-hmm. Are any of those positions unacceptable to you? Now, Senator Benson and Senator Jackson both say they're personally opposed to busing.
I don't care what their personal view is, as long as they're willing to carry out the law.
That's an important distinction.
It's a very important distinction. I was asked at the press conference in Louisville by a reporter, I've forgotten who it was, but one of the reporters said, Senator McGovern, if a candidate is personally opposed to busing but pledges to uphold the law if he's elected president, is that satisfactory to you? I said, that's fine.
It was I who asked that question.
Was it you? Well, it's a good
well,
question.
You got an answer the second time around.
Am I right? I answered your question.
Yeah.
I had no problem with. I don't expect people to fall in love with busing. It's irritating. It's inconvenient. But what's the alternative? As I remember, the 1954 decision, where the court found that segregated schools were a violation of the Constitution, even though the quality of education was the same in the black schools.
Separate could not be.
They said that you can't have segregated education and argue that that's equality. They didn't say that you had to have a school bus. The courts waited, as I remember, for 10 years before they did anything at all to carry out their own decision. Then 10 or 15 years after that 1954 decision, when many school districts had done nothing to break down the barriers of segregation, then in some cases the court said, in order to achieve integration, to break down these walls of segregation, which we find unconstitutional, we're going to order a certain amount of busing. And as I think I'm right on this, only about 5% of the students in the United States have been affected by those court orders. There's something like 46% of the school children in America who ride buses, not because of anything the courts have done, but because that's the best way to get to school. Before the busing orders were issued by the courts, you had buses used to maintain segregation. Black children were bused right by the white schools and vice versa in order to maintain these segregated schools. Nobody was talking about neighborhood schools then. They were riding right out of the neighborhood to get to a segregated school.
Senator, there are other issues in busing, and goodness knows we've devoted a good piece of our time tonight to that. Over the weekend, two rather strange things happened. The new Democratic coalitions in both New York and Massachusetts, caucuses, chose not to endorse any candidate for president. Now, in 1972, you won the endorsement of both of those groups. What do you make of this? Does it mean that nobody is ahead, or that they are all so close together, bunched in the Democratic Party, that this means that you can't pick who the candidate is?
I think it means that at this point, Mr. Agronsky, that no one of the candidates has emerged as one who can claim the so-called political activists. Both in New York and in Massachusetts, where these two tests occurred over the weekend, you have some of the most active and committed political workers in the country, people that are well informed. They care deeply about issues. They're not concerned about whether the candidate has curly hair, or whether he's charismatic, or whether he has a mellow voice, or things of that kind. They want to know where that candidate stands on the big issues before the country. Where does he stand on the issue of war and peace? Where does he stand on tax and welfare reform? Where does he stand on the issue of education, the environment, the question of military spending, civil rights? Those are the issues that they're concerned about. As you say, and at this stage of the campaign last time, I had the endorsement of both of those groups,
yeah.
A clear majority. I think it was something in excess of 60% in both cases. I don't think anyone has yet emerged in that position so far. Maybe somebody will, but apparently no one has yet laid claim to those so-called activists who are
Is there a liberal front
change.
runner in the Democratic Party?
Not at the present time. As I see it, you have 6 or 7 men who are all appealing to the liberal, progressive wing of the Democratic Party. Some of them able campaigners, some of them very good men. It's my own hunch that one of those 6 or 7 men will eventually be the Democratic nominee. You, in all fairness to them, there's no war issue in 1975 that's comparable to the issue we had in 1971.
Well, you know the unhappy wisecrack that Governor Lamb of Colorado made when all of the 10 candidates who are listed addressed the governor's conference here last week. He described them as 10 guys tied for last.
Well, that's a little unfair. Let me just say that those governors were not all that impressive. They came out, the only resolution that made any news was Governor Noel condemning me for standing by the Constitution on the civil rights questions. So I don't buy that line that we don't have any decent candidates running in 1975. I think there are a number of very talented and capable people in that race, and we're going to hear from them. They will discuss the issues. They are going to stand up on these questions. They're advocating a number of things that I think the American people need to know about, that I regard as a long stride forward from where we are now with our present incumbent leadership in the White House. So I think it's a little unfair to talk about them as though they're not campaigning effectively.
Well, I was going to interject that thought here in any case. There's a phrase that one hears, particularly from Democratic liberals, that people ought to go out and campaign on the issues. My own impression from having covered many of these candidates is that it's exactly what they're doing. What's not clear to me is what issues should they be campaigning on that they're not campaigning on?
Mr. Cloud, if I could just say this to you respectfully as a reporter, and I think you're a good one, I think one of the reasons why these candidates are having a harder time getting through than might otherwise be the case is that there's so much reporting about the techniques of the campaign and not enough on what these candidates are saying on the issues. I read all the time stories about who's ahead in the poll and who has hired who for a campaign manager and who got the most applause and who excited the crowd the most. Those things are perhaps worth reporting. But what I'm more interested in is which candidate promises a new direction in this country. Who's going to give us some relief from this constantly rising military spending? Who's going to chart a new foreign policy that will avert another Vietnam and maybe prevent the same thing from happening in Korea?
Oh, which candidate is saying those?
Well, I think a number of them are saying things that are worth listening, Martin. And what I want to do, insofar as I can influence them, is to do more of it, to be bolder and to strike out more forcefully than they are. There's no one of them, very frankly, that's gone as far as I would like to see them go.
Well, do you see yourself as the conscience of your party?
Well, I don't like, that sounds a little self-righteous to talk about being the conscience of the party. If I make my share of the mistakes, and perhaps I haven't always been as clear on the issues as I should have been, but to whatever extent I have any influence inside this Democratic Party, I'd like to encourage these candidates to be as clear and as forceful and as substantive as they can be on the issue. I don't like the present tax system in this country. I don't like the present welfare system. I don't like the present structure on the military system and the amount of resources we're allocating to that. And I want to see candidates who will stand up and offer concrete alternatives to the way we're presently managing our federal affairs. That's what I want to see done.
And as you say, so do the liberal activists in Massachusetts and New York and California and elsewhere, I'm sure. But it seems to me that this year there's also a new element that perhaps wasn't quite as present in 1972, and that is, at least I detect, an element of a desire to win. And it seems to me that that played a role in New York and Massachusetts as well. Do you agree? Do you think that some of these liberals were saying, the reason I'm hanging back, the reason I'm not giving you my endorsement is that I'm not really persuaded you're going to win, and I don't want to back, with all respect, another loser this time?
Well, I suppose I'm not the world's best expert on how to win a general election, although we did pretty well winning a nomination that the leading authorities in the country thought we had no chance of winning. I would just say in response to that question that, of course, I don't know what was in the mind of the voter in Massachusetts and New York over the weekend when they failed to give any one of these candidates the majority they needed. But it may very well be that they're looking for somebody that defines those issues a little more sharply, that they think is worth making a deep commitment to. And I'm not sure they were looking for somebody who is straddling the fence or pulling their punches on the issues.
Let me move you very quickly on to the Republican side of the problem here. Do you think it's going to be Reagan or Ford, and who do you think would be easier to beat?
I'd toss a coin on both of those questions. I have no idea whether it'll be Ford or Reagan, and I don't know which one would be the harder to beat. I would say this, that we have a kind of an assumption in this country that incumbents can't be dislodged. I don't think the late Lyndon Johnson would agree with that. He didn't run in 1968. I don't think that the late Harry Truman would agree with that. He didn't run in '52. They were incumbents, and when somebody won in early primaries, they saw fit not to run. That could happen again.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Stan. Good night for Evening Edition. Tuesday on Evening Edition, a discussion of the President's trip to China with two reporters who traveled with the President, Richard Dudman of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and David Kraslow of the Cox newspapers.
Funding provided by public television stations, the Ford Foundation, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. This program was produced by NPACT, a division of GWETA, which is solely responsible for its content.